Welcome to another video, and guys, in today's video we're going to be covering the topic cardiac work. Cardiac work is of course a physiology topic, but it's mainly based upon physics. So the first thing I want to define is work. What is work? So work is the basic concept of work is that force times displacement. But what does this word mean? Like, we've already heard the formula for work equal to force times displacement. What does that really mean? It means that basically, if you have a book sitting on a table right now, the book is doing no work, zero work. You can see that the book is doing no work. But when you give it force and distance, we can then calculate the book's work, because the book has done work. So for example, if you were to pick it up and move it up, that means you're applying force and you're also applying distance. So that means you've given the book some work and you can calculate the work. So that's the basic concept. So let me repeat what I said, was that if you keep a book on the table, don't do anything to it, then the book will not move, it will not work. But instead, when you pick up the book and you bring it up, that means you're applying work to the book and the book is doing work. So the same concept we can apply, this force and distance we can apply to cardiac work. Cardiac work is going to be basically the force, which is going to be measured in newtons, and the distance will be measured in meters, in joules. And I'll be giving a work example about this. So what is myocardial work? Work is basically the stroke in myocardial terms. So this is physics terms. So how would we say this in myocardial terms? Well, in myocardial terms, it would be basically the work which is the stroke work. Stroke work meaning the amount of blood that is being ejected from the body, the work of the heart that it performs per week. So if someone were to ask you what is the definition of cardiac work, the best definition you give them in myocardial terms, it is that stroke work is the stroke work per beat. So that the stroke work of the heart per beat. So we mainly measure this with the left ventricle. So the stroke. So now the force over here in the formula would become the aortic pressure, and then the distance, which we measure in meters, would be the stroke volume. So essentially, there are two types of stroke work. The first one that we would like to talk about would be the pressure volume curve, and the second one would be the acceleration. And from this, when you add these two up, you will get your stroke volume. So you will get your cardiac work. So what is this pressure volume curve? Well, that's defined just down below. It's basically the shortening of the myocardial fibers to create some tension, to develop some force, to develop some tension, and it is the certain amount of volume which is going to be ejected from the heart with a resistance which develops a force. So if you have a volume of blood that is being displaced, but is being displaced, that means being moved. So if you have a volume of blood that's being moved out of the left ventricle at a distance, but it's being if you have a volume of blood which is being displaced, or it's being moved at a distance against a resistance, that creates a pressure. So the volume of blood that's being moved against a resistance, that creates some pressure. So that's the correct pressure. So that pressure, otherwise known in physics terms, known as force, but more cardiovascular terms, it would be known as pressure. So the formula which I mentioned over here, pressure volume. So the pressure and volume formula, we'll look at it in the next slide. So what is the example of pressure and volume? Like I said, pressure is basically the force. Pressure is basically the volume of blood which is going to be going in a direction against a resistance. This creates a force. So if, for example, you were to punch someone, that punch would be your volume, and that resistance would be the air resistance, and that's what creates the force, because that's what makes the force. So the same thing with blood. You're pumping out blood with some force. When you're pumping out blood against a volume of blood against resistance, and you're creating force. So now the formula of pressure volume formula, this is going to be very simple. Well, it's going to be the per beat. The formula is per beat. It's going to be 70 milliliters. per beat, both the right ventricle and both the left ventricle, they pump out 70 milliliters of blood. The right ventricle, however, is a bit smaller. If you just have a zoomed in version of this, you can see the right ventricle wall is a bit smaller than the left ventricle. So that means the force on the left ventricle will be higher. The force in the pressure in the left ventricle will be higher. The pressure in the right ventricle will be much less because of the thickness of the wall. The amount of blood, however, you can see the size of the chambers, same size. So the amount of blood being pumped out is the same, just the pressure is very different because the left ventricle, thicker wall, and it pumps out to the systematic circulation, which is throughout the whole body. The right ventricle, thinner wall, but it pumps out only towards the lungs, to the pulmonary artery. So we would, of course, see the left ventricle, it has a much higher pressure. So like I said from the previous slide, the formula that we're going to be using to calculate the work is cardiac work is only pressure times volume. So we can see over here, this is our pressure and this is our volume. So our pressure over here will be 100 on the left ventricle, much higher, so it'll be 100 milliliters of mercury. And but we want to convert that to pascals, because as we know from the previous slide that the formula is newtons and distance. So we need to make the terms as similar as possible. So we times it by 133, and then the next thing that we do is the milliliters. So 70 milliliters of blood is constant in both right and left, and we times it by 10 to the power minus 6. This is because if we look on Google, what is our how do we convert milliliters to milliliters to meters cube? We can see that 1 milliliter will equal to 10 to the power minus 6 milliliters, 10 to the power minus 6 cubic meters. So let's head back to over here, and then we see over here that we just have times by 10 to the power minus 6. So 10 to the power minus 6, 10 to the power minus 6, and the right ventricle is going to be a bit less pressure, so 15. But again, we have to convert it, and then we get our answer, which is going to be in joules, or you can say nanometers, newtons times meters. But newtons times meters is the same thing as joules, nothing different. So now why acceleration? Because acceleration is we have to add this to the, so why acceleration? Why can't cardiac work only be pressure times of volume? Well, because we have to calculate the mass at which the velocity is going at. So the blood's mass and the velocity that's going at the mass of the blood at a certain velocity. So for example, for the acceleration, for the energy, I believe so, of the acceleration, we would need half times the mass, which is going to be kgs, and velocity squared, which is going to be, of course, meters per second. Half times the kg, 70 kgs. Why 70 kgs? Because we know that the volume is 70 ml, so the same thing. But of course, we have to convert it to kgs. So 10 to the power minus 2. And 0.5 and 0.5, we do this and we get the answer 0.09. So we get this is our acceleration. We plus this with the previous two values that we found over here. Just copy those quick, and then whatever the answer would be here would be your total cardiac work. Now cardiac work. But now guys, whatever the answer would be here, just use a calculator, calculate that. That'll be the total cardiac work. Well, the next thing I want to talk about is going to be the pressure volume curve, the pressure volume loop or curve. The same idea. Essentially, looks a bit complicated because of how many arrows I put over here, but trust me, very simple concept. The basic concept I would like to get you guys to understand is that this is the pressure and this is the volume. Very understandable. Okay, now why we're looking at stroke volume? Because stroke volume is the blood that is being ejected. So that's why we're looking at stroke volume. So everything over here we're focusing on is on the left ventricle. So if you look at A, B, C, D, each mark A, B, C, D is going to be a opening and a closure of the valves, and in fact the ones B and D are the ones that are going to be the closure of the valves, and the A and C's, which are leaning towards the left, are going to be the closure of the valves. B and D instead are going to be the opening of the valves. Even more basic information I can give you is that everything over here, it has to do something with contraction. Everything on the right side, contraction. If you see right side, that's contraction. Everything on the left side, that's diastole. So anything that you see on the left side, so this be the left side, and this also being the left side, that's diastole. So if you were to draw an imaginary line over here in the middle, as shown over here, so everything on the right, contraction over here, diastole. So what's happening over here? Well, very basic stuff that's happening. Well, I want to start off from the A, because A is diastole. So I believe the cardiac cycle starts from diastole. So in A, like I said, that there's something at any point, there's something happening with the valve. As you can see, there's high pressure over here, and it's going down to low pressure. So that means the ventricle must have lost pressure. So therefore, the aortic valve, which is over here, if you have a zoomed in over here, this valve, it must have closed, because it has, you can see over here from the dip over here, you can see this dip, pressure in the ventricle closing is less. So that means lesser than the aortic pressure over here, valves close. Fair enough. Now what's happening? Well, all that's happening is the muscles are relaxing. So we can see no changes to the volume. We see over here changes to the pressure. A to B, no changes in the volume at all. No changes in the volume, only change in pressure. So you can see that this must have been very contracted. This part must have been very small, but now it's just relaxing. It's unveiling. Now over here B, we want in the meanwhile, blood is being accumulated over here. We want blood to come here. So what happens? Mitral valves, they open, and we're just seeing it over here. We're just seeing blood filling. Now what happens is, now the pressure over here is being built up. You can see that there's a slight build up in pressure. So now what's going to happen over here, and see the mitral valves close, because now the contraction is beginning. We don't want any blood. We don't want any backflow. So therefore, this mitral valves closed over here, and now we're building up the pressure. So more ventricular pressure to overcome the aortic pressure, so that this valve opens, blood is being pumped out. So now there's just a build up of pressure, no changes to the volume. Right over here, both valves are closed at this point. Both valves over here. This is a very important point to mention, because this is the only part where both valves over here over here at this point, very important point to mention, because both valves over here are closed. Both valves over here closed. So now we need to build up pressure here. Opens up the valve at a point D. Blood is being injected. Blood is being injected at a huge pressure, and then the pressure, when it starts to dip, then the ventricular pressure decreases. It decreases lower than the aortic pressure, causes valve to close at A. Very simple concept. Let's move on to the oxygen consumption. Very important concept to learn, and oxygen consumption and efficiency. So oxygen consumption is basically the oxygen supply to. Imagine the heart is it is a factory. Imagine the heart, basically it's a factory. It's basically a machine. For the machine you need fuel. What's the fuel for the heart? Well, it's oxygen. So for the heart to, in order to make its mechanical work, or the machine to do its mechanical work, well, it needs this fuel, which is the oxygen. Oxygen. And what does oxygen do? Well, that's highlighted. Well, what does oxygen do? Well, that's shown right over here. Oxygen, oxidative deamination of nutrients. So that's the main thing. That's the main function of oxygen. And if here's the rate over here, the rate is 100 grams is 8 to 10 milliliters per minute of oxygen supply, and the whole heart is approximately 300 milligrams. So the whole heart would be approximately 300 to 400 grams. So if you do the multiplication, so you multiply this by 3 or 4, you would get 25 milliliters per minute of oxygen to the whole heart. So the total coronary circulation is 250 milliliters, and 25 ml of that. So 250 is the total coronary circulation, and 25 of that, so 10% of that, is only going to the myocardial fibers. The factors that are affecting the oxygen consumption, well, the factors which are affecting oxygen consumption are very simple factors. When you exercise, you need more and more amount of oxygen to be supplied to your tissues. So therefore, the left ventricle is being pumping out more. Addition to that, some pathological conditions are good. They're going to be there. For instance, the aortic stenosis, and aortic stenosis, there is going to be blocked in this ventricle. So there's going to be increased amount of work by the left ventricle to left ventricle to work more because there's a stenosis